If the scientific community can be persuaded by creationists, then I will be impressed. I will have confidence in whatever modified theory the scientific community produces. I will have confidence because I understand the processes at work in science. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to begin the 5-minute rebuttal. Dr. Arlo Molenpa, speaking on creation, will begin first.
First of all, I'm not a professional debater. This is the second debate that I've ever participated in. But I don't believe the other speaker stuck with the subject. I might mention, if you taped it or so forth, I never mentioned God, I never mentioned religion, one time. I disproved that evolution was science. I disproved that it contradicted scientific laws. I showed it was not a mathematical probability. Our other speaker talked about overwhelming evidence. He presented absolutely no evidence whatever for any of this evolution. Okay? He said he was once a Pentecostal preacher. I happen to have a doctor's of science in chemical engineering. I've taught chemistry for a number of times. I am a scientist. But maybe to his surprise, I also am a Pentecostal preacher. I have no problem whatsoever with true science and the Bible. That which is actually observable, that which is actually repeatable, that which is actually subject to experimentation and verifiable does not contradict the Bible. Now, it was mentioned flim-flam evidence. Well, I guess that's up to you to decide. At least I presented some evidence. I am confident that God exists. Now, if you were walking up, two of us were walking up to a sandcastle, and we could agree on a number of things. We could agree on the color. We could probably compare the ruler, the height. We might even be able to anticipate what we think the mass was and do a chemical composition. But when it comes to origins, if we did not see it built, we could argue till we're blue in the face. I would say that most of you would agree that this sandcastle was produced by a sculptor or a team of sculptors. How many would agree with that? Okay. The other argument is that the wind and the waves washed up this sandcastle. Which is more logical? We talked about faith. He mentioned faith. It takes more faith to believe that that sandcastle got there by chance. Now, I have no problem with the Badlands of South Dakota, that you go through that and you see that that's a product of wind and erosion. Okay, I don't have any problem with that. But to tell me that, go a little further to South Dakota, the Black Hills, and to say that that occurred by erosion and wind, is anybody who believes that, I can't respect their thinking process at all. I hope that's being kind. We talked about hostility. I don't think I'm hostile. I just question the, some would say, intelligence. When you see something complicated like this, it didn't happen by chance. When you see something as complicated as a living cell, that is so complicated. I was in a debate, only the other debate I had was this week. The lady I debated said, recognize it could not have occurred, life could not have occurred in 4.5 billion years on Earth, so therefore it must have been formed from some other planet and came here. I thought, when I got up, I said, that sounds like a fairy tale to me. First of all, it doesn't solve the problem of evolution. It would still be mathematically improbable on Mars or wherever else it was supposed to come from, but then how would it have survived the journey here through cold space? Okay. Now, He talked a number of times about the scientific method. I showed what the scientific method was. You have a problem, you have hypotheses, I agree with you. The hypothesis can be proved false. You know, if you had the hypothesis that the ball stayed there or that the ball went up, you could prove that false. So another word for science is testable or falsifiable. Now, he said, if creationists have a valid argument, why not present it to the scientific community? What do you think I'm here for from California? Why do you think we've challenged the scientific, the people? Why is it nobody's willing to debate? Because evolution is not scientific. Evolution is a religion. We'll get into that more.
My opponent says we don't ever have fish with legs. Why aren't there any examples of fish with legs? Well, there are fish that do walk, and they do walk on land, and they walk on land right here in Florida, in fact, in Hillsborough County, Florida, and I've seen them walking. They're called walking catfish, and not only do they walk from lake to lake, they can stay out of the water for hours. My opponent brings up the second law of thermodynamics and says everything has to go from order to disorder. Well, I would remind you that when precipitation falls from the clouds and freezes, it oftentimes forms something called a snowflake, and that certainly does look mighty orderly to me. And I would also think that a chemist would know a little something about chemicals coming together in an orderly fashion. For instance, if I combine two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, we make something quite orderly called water. And how do crystals form in nature if that isn't going from disorder to order? We have many observations of this phenomena. And I would remind you that a law in science is not a rule. It's an observation, and it's a descriptive observation. And that's all it is. Mathematical chances of something happen. What do you think the chances are that I could produce a student on this campus out of just 1,024 students who could flip heads on a coin 10 times in a row without a miss and do it on the first try? Well, that sounds really astronomical, doesn't it? And if I want to employ flim-flam, I can really make you think that's impossible. But the fact is, I can do that, because if I assemble 1,024 and we start off with the elimination process and we flip the coin, half of those people are going to come up with heads. That leaves 512. Well, I'll say that they flip the same side of the coin 10 times in a row, not necessarily heads. Well, half of them will flip heads. And we use those half to flip the coin, and another half of those will come up with heads. Now we're down to 256. Flip again, we get down to 128. Flip again, we get down to 64. Flip again, we're down to 32. Flip again, we're down to 16. Flip again, we're down to 8. Flip again, we're down to 4. Flip again, we're down to 2. And bingo, I have a student who's flipped a coin 10 times in a row and come up with the same side of the coin 10 times in a row on one try. Things are not as impossible as some people would like to make them seem. Who speaks for the scientific community? The National Academy of Sciences. Upon authority of the charter granted to it by the Congress in 1863, the Academy has a mandate that requires it to advise the federal government on scientific and technical matters. What misinformation is used to attack evolution? Well, creation would have us believe that the scientific community is divided over the question of whether evolution is fact. Well, here's what the National Academy says in this book. While the mechanisms of evolution are still under investigation, scientists universally accept that the cosmos, our planet, and life evolved and continue to evolve. The National Academy of Sciences states unequivocally that creationism has no place in any science curriculum at any level.